Hello, everyone. Wish I could see your faces, but I'll assume that you're there. Really excited to give a little tech talk on AI agents, on what we're building at Sierra, and then also on a new program that we just announced actually 1 month ago, called APX, which is our new grad program with rotations in agent product management and agent engineering, which is kind of a new field that I would say has emerged or at least been popularized over the past year. So I'll just jump in, and I'm assuming that in the Zoom meeting chat, I can see any questions that come through. So feel free to ask questions as we're going. And I look forward to actually seeing your faces and meeting you at some point, and hope that you all consider applying for the APX program. Cool, so I'm Zach. I'm a product manager here at Sierra. One of my main focuses is voice. So in October, we announced the ability for Sierra agents to take phone calls, not just chat with folks. And so I'll have a little side section on that too, because I think there are some interesting case studies, especially for the engineers in the room. Here's our agenda today. So we'll start with Sierra on the left. Then we'll move into how we build AI agents and AI agents as a concept. And then we'll talk a little bit about voice. And then putting it last so everyone sticks around, we'll go into the APX program and some of the details around there. The presentation is designed to be interactive. So I'm hoping you use the chat a lot and it makes its way through to Zoom. There are a lot of questions in the chat. I'll probably skip over those a little bit just because the audience isn't synchronously here, but bear with me on that. So first off, AI agents, and throughout the show, I'll be dropping some of Sierra's company values. We have 5 of them, and usually this is a quiz, and then at the end, those who can remember it get a little prize. But since we're remote and in a broadcast format, I'll be playing both the role of host and audience member for these. So anyway, why now? Why Sierra? Why AI agents, et cetera? So it all kind of starts, I would say, it starts as early as the 1970s, and even before that, in terms of the promise of artificial intelligence when it comes to computing. But there's really an inflection point in 2017 with a paper, mostly out of Google, called "Attention is All You Need." And I think if the audience were here, there'd probably be some nodding. A lot of you have probably heard of this paper or read it. Highly recommend learning about it. I was actually working at Google at this time, and I was working on AI. I was building the first version of Google Lens, which launched summer of 2017. And this paper, it made ripples. There was definitely some exciting stuff going on with deep learning and deep dream, but we had no idea, how big it would be. And our focus at the time in computer vision was on related but different technology called recurrent convolutional neural networks. So this paper, was way ahead of its time. And it wasn't until some of the applications that followed it up that it really started to be clear how impactful it was going to be. And one of those papers is called Improving Language Understanding by Generative Pre-training. So as you can see by the email addresses, this paper is out of OpenAI. I think it was about a year later, but I'm not sure. There's no date on the slide. And I think some people are probably nodding. You can read the last 3 words here, or the last 2 words. And generative pre-training is what the whole world now knows as GPT. And so you might have heard of some of the authors. Ilya Sutskever is particularly famous, and Karthik actually leads our research team at Sierra now. So he's just sitting right over there, trying to make our product better. So this is really the start of the wave, I would say, 6 and 7 years ago, in terms of what's enabling us to build intelligent systems today. And what we can do because of this is do silly things like this. We can write a limerick about how Berkeley is superior to Stanford. I thought, I wish the audience was here. I thought this might get a laugh or two. And then, so we have this, we can write limericks. Why do we need agents? Well, by themselves, large language models don't actually accomplish the full task of what people need, and in particular, the full task of what businesses need. So as a consumer, ChatGPT is extremely useful. I use it every day. But if I wanted to have ChatGPT represent my brand, and I wanted to be 100% confident that it wasn't going to make things up, that it wasn't going to misguide anyone. If I wanted to make sure that it was, following all of the compliance and regulatory rules of my business, if I wanted to have it integrate with all of the systems, that I'm using internally, my database with all my customers, all the APIs that I call, if I wanted to have ChatGPT supervise another version of ChatGPT to make sure it stays on the rails. And then also, if I wanted it to be able to pick up the phone, there's a lot of integration work and a lot of really difficult software engineering and AI engineering, and as we'll come to see, agent engineering in order to make this happen. And so on the right here, you have some examples where certain businesses, tried to just use large language models and had some, unfortunate and in some cases comical results. I think the one on the bottom has been cited the most, where the Air Canada agent invented some information about a bereavement policy in order to be helpful to a customer, and then it ended up going to court, and instead of settling, they fought it and lost. Which is also questionable, but basically led to them thinking what we know here, which is that with a large language model alone, you can't just stand up a fully working agent on behalf of your business. So this brings us to kind of a first Sierra value, and I'll sprinkle these throughout because this is in part a pitch on the APX program, and you should know what Sierra cares about in order to decide whether to apply. But first and foremost, it's trust. It's first in this presentation, but it's also first in terms of how we value it. We work directly with customers. We work super closely with customers. All the folks from Sierra on this call know that, how the internal workings of, a dozen or 2 dozen of our customers actually works, from meeting with them on a weekly basis and really getting into the details. So that trust is key. Much more important than any of the other things that we focus on. So moving forward, there's a whole nother generation of papers based on the idea that large language models alone are not enough. And how can we build these agentic systems in order to make them perform at a higher level? And I'm holding back some words because I have some upcoming slides that sort of build towards some of these attributes. But if you see here, these are some interesting slides, a couple of them out of Berkeley, which I'm excited about. I actually lived in Berkeley for most of the last 3 years, and my wife went to Berkeley Law School. So, and my mom went to Berkeley for her PhD, and I was born in Berkeley. So huge fan of the university and always excited to see more breakthroughs from you all. And so Gorilla, they actually have a pretty cool Discord as well. It's pretty active. It is a sort of tool use, figuring out how to connect large language models to APIs and make decisions. We also have the other 3 papers here actually from people that either work at Sierra or have worked at Sierra, Shunyu, Noah, and Karthik again. And so these are also pretty interesting papers to check out. I highly recommend, just even if you don't take anything else away from this presentation, the people on this slide are much smarter than I am, so go read this paper. So what is an AI agent exactly? And there are a bunch of different attributes that I think define AI agents. There doesn't have to be one definition exactly, but one thing that I think has come to the fore in the past year and almost like already ran the cycle of being really cool and new and then being like table stakes and easy is basically referring to ground truth documents. So this is often called retrieval augmented generation, the ability to look up things in the real world pull them into context, and then generate responses, taking into account those real-world facts. I think retrieval augmented generation has also, taken leaps and bounds forward, with later versions of ChatGPT, with tools like Perplexity, both in terms of the indexing, the retrieval, and also in terms of using live results. ChatGPT can surf the web now. Another thing we mentioned is system integration, tool use. This is really, I think, something that differentiates AI agents from large language models alone, for sure. And typically, this would be a quiz with you all of, okay, what does this emoji mean? If you have a moment in your head, think, oh, what's going on there? And feel free to put anything in the chat if you want to participate. The next one is autonomy. So AI agents can make decisions on their own. They don't need you to approve every step. They don't need you to guide them exactly what to do. This is extremely powerful, as we'll see. And then fourth, penultimately, orchestration. So you can have multiple large language models and even multiple AI agents kind of conducting the orchestra together. I like to think of this the same way, your brain has, a neocortex and an amygdala and a hypothalamus, and they're all the brain, but there's a lot of, sub-brains, so to speak. And we also have, agents within the agent, such as a supervisor that makes sure that, everything is staying on the rails. Finally, and most importantly, I would say, is the ability to reason. I would say this observation is, what makes Sierra possible. It's not too hard to build an agent that can understand language and respond with language. And that's basically what large language models give you out of the box. But the ability to actually reason and make decisions using large language models unlocks a whole new set of potential activities when using natural language that were really hard and error prone with a previous generation of classifiers. So this one's really important to us. So what is Sierra? Sierra is agents for companies. So if you have a company, we can help you build an AI agent to represent your company. I'll get into some of our more prominent customers and the ones that are on our website later. But we work with a number of customers across a number of different sectors, from streaming software to, selling vacuum cleaners to, retail, to insurance, to healthcare, to finance, banking, et cetera. So we kind of span the gamut of all of the industry that you could imagine having an AI agent. And the reason that we're taking such a broad approach is because we think AI agents are the next big wave in terms of how consumers interact with technology. If you think back, and this is before a lot of you were born probably, or definitely, in the 90s, businesses were getting online. And if you go into the Wayback Machine and you type the website of your favorite business or someone that you're a customer of that has been around for 30 years, you'll see their website, you can see it back in the early 2000s or 90s. And it's pretty interesting and hilarious and looks, very, very simple compared to the way things look now. Then in the 2000s with Facebook, with Twitter, even before that, with some of the earlier social networks, companies started to feel like they had to get online with a social profile, not just a website in a corner of the internet, but something that people could discover when they go on Facebook. And that was shortly followed with the iPhone and Android, and the feeling that at least large businesses needed to have a mobile app in order to meet customers where they are. And our feeling is that where customers are going to be now is talking to AI agents. I think ChatGPT was the quickest product ever to 100 million users. It just feels so natural to use. I mean, for anyone who was working on AI in 2017, the idea that you would have something as natural and useful as ChatGPT felt like it was further off, and felt like, it wouldn't be happening at the same time as, Waymo cars becoming popular. It would be much later. So we're really impressed with the progress. And we feel like every company, we're seeing this in the market too. I think it's more than just a feeling. every company knows that in order to meet customers where they are, they need to have an AI agent. So this kind of maps to the previous slide, and I'll just fast forward one so you can see Sierra agents can do all of the things that agents can do. And I think specifically the devil is in the details a little bit in terms of how we do them with each customer. And I'll get into that as we talk about agent engineering and the APX program. Normally I would pause here for questions. I don't think there have been any questions. But please let me know if I'm not able to see the chat. There are 2 tabs in Zoom. There's open question, there's Q&A, and there's chat. So I don't see anything in either one. So just to, especially for the geeks in the room, this is a bit of the underlying platform that helps us build agents with Sierra. I think there are 2 purposes to this slide. One is to kind of show you just all the different things that Sierra is working on, everything that we have to do. And then 2 is kind of just give you a sense that, oh yeah, this is a lot more than just wrapping something around ChatGPT or Llama 3.1 or one of the other, cost-effective open source models. There's really all of this that goes into building an agent for a business, from the platform layer all the way up to how we plug it into your website. And most of our customers actually just use the Sierra embed for their website and mobile apps, but we also integrate with their phone lines and then also via API. So a number of our customers call our API directly and then build their own user interface. The other 2 pieces of this diagram are the Agent SDK. If you become an agent engineer at Sierra, you'll be working in the Agent SDK every single day. It's a fantastic piece of software that allows you to write agents in a declarative, debuggable, and modular way. So what that means is you can specify the behavior of the agent, and that's very scalable, just by sort of, similar to the way that you might build a website, for example. And then when something goes unexpectedly, you can diagnose exactly where that's happening in the code base, make a point fix, and not worry about juice squirting out the other end when you apply pressure on one end. So the Agent SDK is really exciting, one of the coolest inventions that I've seen since being in the AI space. And then on top of that, if you're a customer, you'll be using our Experience Manager all the time to make sure that conversations are going well, to monitor key metrics. I would say this piece of the stack is going to be particularly interesting to folks that have a sort of business orientation, and are interested in working with customers, are interested in how businesses work, because you learn a ton about that working in the Experience Manager. In addition to all of this stuff that kind of makes up AgentOS, we also have integration points. So this is just another slide. I won't spend too much time on it. But all of our agents, if you would prefer to speak to a human, we allow you to transfer directly to a live human agent and talk to them instead. We can take action autonomously using companies' systems of record, can answer questions from the knowledge base, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically anything that the business needs to do, we're able to do using our overall platform of AgentOS. So all of that's cool, but obviously, right? There's so much to do. Everyone knows AI agents are a thing at this point. Maybe when Sierra was started a 1.5 years ago, this was new and interesting, but now it's super obvious. And we see that with companies too. They get it right off the bat. They're spending tons of money on customer service. They're spending tons of money on sales. They're spending tons of money on retention. And in many cases, the customers are not getting a good experience. So they're basically spending a ton of money trying to make this experience good, but it's still not good. So there's a ton of motivation here from customers. And so, of course, the space is going to be extremely competitive. And you can definitely hear Steve Kornacki saying that, and so we're not naive about that. We don't think we're onto an idea that nobody else knows about. And so that takes me to another one of Sierra's values. Oops, I'll skip forward to that, which is competitive intensity. So, we know we don't have the luxury of patience. We're moving really quickly. I think the Sierra folks on the call will testify to the fact that the last 9 months, the last year have just been a total whirlwind. And we know we're onto something, and we see that in the market. So we're trying to deliver as quickly as we can. And these previous slides, by the way, were just sort of Googling, AI agent companies and seeing this gigantic list, and we're that little company there, and then Googling, something a little bit broader, seeing this massive list with more companies than you even knew were in the space listed, and we're listed right there. I wasn't even sure we were on this slide. So, that just humbles us in terms of the size of the opportunity. And, we think we're going to be successful, but we also know that we have to deliver in order to earn that. So how do we actually go about building agents? And for the engineers in the room, this might be one of the more interesting pieces of the presentation. Typically, this works well with sort of a quiz mindset, but what does it take to build a Sierra agent? So a lot of you, if you're building agents, if you're using tools like LangGraph, for example, which allows you to dive deep in the code and have low-level exposure, but also allows you to kind of see the flow chart of what actions you're connecting to other actions. And then also simpler tools in the customer service space that typically aren't as powerful as a tool like LangGraph that allow you to kind of draw boxes and arrows and create a flow of logic. This is a good way to start, right? You might say, okay, let's do this and it might work. But when you actually release this to customers, they go off in a million different ways. And it reminds me of something that we knew working at Google, which is that I forget if it's 15 or 20. I think it's 15% of all Google searches have never been searched before. So the world is changing, people are changing, culture is changing, and people just have new ideas that were never had before. And so it's a pretty inspiring fact, but we see the same thing in AI agents, which is when you give people a blank text box and you allow them to explore in any direction, it's extremely powerful, but it also requires comprehensiveness and flexibility that is not offered by a system that's as rigid as this. So, we didn't necessarily know this off the bat. We started with a system that looks a little bit like that, but, a little over a year ago, pivoted away. And we decided to pursue something more like this. And folks in the room have probably seen and maybe even built things like this, where you construct a prompt based on configuration and based on different values that come in and different settings, basically. And then the prompt is kind of this Mad Lib of all the variables in your system. And that allows you to pass the right context through to a large language model. And this is also a more flexible approach. But the way that the first approach of boxes and arrows is too rigid, this actually doesn't have enough guardrails. So just sort of, oh, good. Michonne has chatted in Zoom that we might have some questions on YouTube. So I'll pause and answer any questions that we have. I don't mean to blaze through.
Yeah, I can ask what I'm seeing. It says, regarding reasoning, how do you combine general knowledge of LLMs, data sources, and learned information from the companies and users you work with to reason better about the interactions in the short and long term?
And then it looks like the second question might be from the same person.
Yes. Also, how are you ensuring the security in the agent OS framework described in the picture, i.e. trust, safety, PII protection?
So in the first case, these are great questions, by the way. And in the first case, it's really hard. It's kind of the shortest answer. And a ton of our investment and development as a company has gone into building systems that allow us to reason better. That's really where the Agent SDK comes in. So the Agent SDK is our declarative framework for specifying agent behavior. And we have different skills in the Agent SDK. So I think, the same way that you might have an input box on a website, we also have an input the ability for an agent to take input, and our agent engineers can use that input skill, in order to develop agents and be able to take someone's phone number or take someone's email. So we've kind of layered, more and more purpose-built software on top of each other until it's actually, powerful and ergonomic to build these agents. But I would say, like, we've been humbled multiple times trying to do it this way and trying to do it this way. And that's where the Sierra Agent SDK with our high order skills and sort of goals and guardrails approach allows us to, actually have success. So this might be a longer discussion on that first question, but I think the Agent SDK is the shortest answer. The other thing that I would say is that we have an evaluation pipeline that allows us to, because we're processing millions of conversations in production, we're able to evaluate agent behavior for each of our customers and rank it, quantitatively and qualitatively. And oftentimes our customers actually have full teams staffed just grading the agent, sort of these, we call them AI architects. And in previously they might have been like customer service managers or sales managers or any of the use cases that we're fulfilling. And so we have this iterative loop of improvement, which I'll get into a little bit later as well. The second question on security, trust, safety, PII redaction, et cetera. There are a couple pieces to this. I think, something like PII redaction is a bit more straightforward. Where we run everything through redaction technology, and we make sure that, nothing is exposed. We have conservative and flexible retention policies and kind of work with each company to meet their needs. When it comes to, hallucination and API requests, for example, I think the best way to think about it is the same way that you would think about your website. So if I'm logged in as Zach, and I know Mishan's on the call too, I can't just make a request to get Mishan's account information. And so we have similar authentication paradigms that we would have for a website, and every interaction with a system is deterministic. So, response generation, reasoning, decision making, language understanding, these all are powered by large language models, but we also have a ton of just, plain old software under the hood as well for when we need to deterministically interact with systems. Cool. And the Agent SDK, I think, I'm not sure where we'll be in the future, but, right now this is basically a proprietary technology inside of Sierra, so it's not open source. I'm just reading the response here of checking it out. I would recommend reading the article on Sierra's blog around the agent development lifecycle, which gets into some of the Agent SDK and is, I think, really interesting. And we're excited to kind of, expand the tent in terms of who can use it over time. We're just working with customers to make sure that it's as purpose-built as possible. So this kind of takes me to our next Sierra value, which is craftsmanship. We really care about getting things right. I think for folks in the room that might identify as, very detail-oriented, this actually is like stress relief. I think a lot of startup culture is, launch and iterate, 80-20, done is better than perfect. And it's not that, we still move extremely quickly, but we just like to get things right. And so there's a culture, an attitude, and I think it rubs off on our customers as well, that, we want to do things that we're proud of. And so I think especially because we have large enterprise customers, that makes a ton of sense. Whereas often in other environments, having a background in the consumer space where you value your users a ton, you want to do best for your users, but you just have too much scale and not enough resources to really do best for each individual user, you can kind of get into more of a sort of growth hacking 80-20 mindset, and it's really nice to kind of take the approach of craftsmanship. So that one's a personal passion for me, one of our values, as an enterprise-focused company. I mentioned the agent development lifecycle before. Highly recommend the blog post that our founders, Clay and Brett, wrote on the Sierra agent development lifecycle. This is something that we built in-house working with customers in order to find the best way to take their agent from good on day one. Maybe in the earliest days, it was okay on day one. Now it's either good or great on day one, to like mind-blowing. And, I can't believe we didn't start working with Sierra sooner. And so we kind of go through this process over and over again. And this is kind of how we view craftsmanship. It doesn't mean that it has to be perfect on day one, but we should be, targeting excellent at all times. In order to do this, and in order to, do justice to the agent development lifecycle, we had to kind of reinvent the position of software engineer. We were inspired by the concept of AI engineering, which has come up over the past year. There are a lot of job applications for AI engineers, really over the past few years. And if any of you are fans of the Latent Space podcast with Alessio and Swix, they do a ton of, I think they coined the term AI engineer and do a ton of publicity for it as well. And so we kind of took that and we said, okay, what do we actually need to do to build agents in Sierra? And came up with the concept of agent engineer, which was what a lot of our engineers were doing at the time. And so what this is it's similar to AI engineering. You have to be on the cusp of you have to be on the frontier, like really understanding what's possible with AI. You have to be, a really top tier software engineer. And then also you have to work very closely with customers. And so it's kind of like this three-part Venn diagram, whereas I would say AI engineering is kind of the first two. And so I'll get into that more with the APX program as well. Takes me to our next, and I think fourth, second to last value that I'll cover, which is customer obsession. You probably can hear it through this talk. I'm actually holding back a bit on customer stuff because I think the tech is probably more interesting to this audience. But at Sierra, we're really excited about making our customers successful. We're really excited about the technology. We don't view those things in conflict at all. We think they kind of reinforce each other because the data that we get from being so close to customers is just gold when it comes to having product and technical insights to make everything better. And that holistic view is why I'm so excited about the APX program as well. Some of the customers on our website, I think you might be familiar with some of these brands. You might have SiriusXM in your car or a Sonos speaker at home. You might have ADT helping protect your house or your family's house. And so these are some of the earliest Sierra customers who have just seen great results and helped us build momentum so far. And then a couple newer customers that are more in the retail space. You can kind of see some of the business metrics we track, and customer satisfaction, making sure that the agent can resolve as many cases as possible as quickly as possible. So AG1, if you're familiar with their the powder that they produce that you mix into a drink, and then Casper is a mattress company that kind of pioneered the mattress in a box concept. I see another question coming in. How are we tackling inhibition on the part of enterprise customers in adopting AI agents, security, et cetera? It's a mix. We see a mix. I think a lot of times in enterprise, the sales cycle is many months. So it's not like we're tackling it, in one call. We have ongoing relationships. We try to be thought partners to large enterprises, and there are plenty of companies where we work closely with them. We go over to their office, we brainstorm, and then, they might decide to try to give it a go themselves, and then they come back to us in 6 months, or they have success with part of the journey themselves. I would say though, we're just really buttoned up. We've been enterprise focused from day one. We've always planned to be an enterprise company. I think a lot of startups, start with developer and then say, hey, how do we break into enterprise? And we kind of took the opposite. Our design partners, we had 6 of them, and they're all now long-term customers with the company, all 6 of them. And in many cases, they're some of our biggest customers. So, we've been building for enterprise from the start, is kind of the short answer. Agent SDK is not no code or low code. It needs an agent engineer with a solid software engineering background. That is correct. I think maybe we'll get to a point where at some point you can build agents of the complexity that we're building without code. Today, we think that having the agent engineering team is one of our big differentiators as a company, and our customers are validating that. So I think we feel very confident that the ability to actually control things at the finest detail is important, and people need to understand how large language models work in order to use them successfully. And do we have connectors for Google, Azure, AWS, Salesforce? Short answer is yes. We, going back to that slide with all the integration points, we integrate with any of the platforms that our customers use. That's never really something that stands in our way. Next question. Mishan, do you want to read it actually, just for production value?
Yes. We had a couple pop through. Apart from, let's call them customer-facing agents you showcase from your customers, do you develop agents or plan to for internal processes of companies, i.e. improvement of pipelines, data centers?
So typically, if I go back to this slide, all the way back here. Oh no, actually, sorry, I shouldn't have gone back. Here, LLMs alone are not enough. Where this shows itself the most and where Sierra is most valuable is large consumer applications with a ton of scale. That's where you need to think about automation in the first place, and where you might have seasonal spikes where customers are waiting on hold for many minutes or hours at a time in order to speak to someone. That's where trust and safety is extremely risky to not get right. That's where data protections are extremely important. That's where voice really stands out because people are calling in. So the vast majority of the value that Sierra provides is with consumer applications, and that's our focus. We have a couple examples, especially when one of our customers is already a large customer of ours, where we've built internal tools, or we do a proof of concept that starts internal and then goes external. But 99% or 95% plus of our work is dedicated to the consumer use cases, where all of these things become not just nice to have, but paramount. And then there's another question as I fast forward back, which language is used for coding? So our stack, the agent SDK is written in TypeScript, and that's primarily the language that agent engineers use to build agents. There are a number of other languages in use at the company. I think Python and Go are probably the ones that are the most widely used. All right, moving forward to the customer slides. I'll keep chugging along. I really appreciate these questions. They're really thoughtful questions and show that you all know a ton about AI already, which makes me very excited. So here's kind of an example of the end result. This is just a demo slide. We have our own company called Sierra Outfitters, which is sort of a fictional Western wear retail brand that we use for some generic demos. And you can kind of see how, if it needs order number and email address, it's able to kind of manage this. I mentioned earlier, having an input skill, and kind of being purpose-built for service, sales, customer experience, retention, all those things that companies care about, helps us go, a level or two higher up and make things really capable and really powerful and really ergonomic. So moving on, I'll just touch quickly on voice agents. I want to make sure we have time for APX. So this will feel like total light speed, but it's what I'm working on most. So I really like talking about it. And it's, I think, there's some counterintuitive bits in here that people might not know going in. So a Sierra agent, we call it built once to run anywhere. So the code base that powers chat, email, messaging, and phone is all the same. You can branch out the same way you might think about responsive breakpoints on a website. If the screen is less than 600 pixels, turn this gallery layout into a column layout, etc. That might be something that you think about as a web developer. As an agent engineer, you think about kind of responsive design for the different channels that people might interact with. You probably already know this if you've made a call to a company recently, but people are most frustrated by having to wait on hold. And I think the thing that I didn't know before I started working at Sierra is just how expensive this is to customers. So for a phone call, it's around $10 per call. It ranges, but think about every time you call in, you wait on hold for 20 minutes. You have a generally negative experience. The customer also loses $10, the company also loses $10. So there's an opportunity to make the experience much better and also save companies a lot of money. This slide, usually I ask, what are these two bars? I'll spoil it for you. One of our largest customers on the left, they get X million chats per year. They get 4X million calls per year. So this is pretty typical that something like 80% of volume is coming in through the phone, especially for large enterprise customers. So just going through a couple of different architectures, this is kind of just a survey case study. You're probably familiar with this architecture. Someone talks, you transcribe it to text, you respond to the text, and then you synthesize that into audio or voice. This is great. It works pretty well. You can get it down to pretty low latency and do a lot of tricks, but you'll never know what they sounded like. You won't know the difference between, oh, that sounds great, and well, that sounds great, which are two very different statements. And then when you speak, there are some promptable APIs like ElevenLabs, but it's hard to actually generate the speech without actually being able to prompt it. And so one thing you can do is kind of turn the agent into something that generates voice instead of generating text. So you're still transcribing, you don't know the tone of voice, but you're actually generating audio straight from the text. And I mentioned ElevenLabs has promptable synthesis. OpenAI also has a audio chat completions endpoint. So there are ways to do this, using publicly available providers. And then finally, I think you probably have heard of, or at least and maybe experimented with OpenAI's real-time API, which I think is the first widely available version of this. There are also voice-to-voice models. I think Google Gemini might have something like this as well, in terms of being able to actually listen to what's being said, hear things like pronunciation, and then use that to respond. And you can also, it's not just pronunciation and sarcasm and tone. There's also, nonverbal cues like laughter, frustration, etc. Those are particularly important in our context. I'll blaze through this. I just wanted to walk you through, as an interesting case study, what happens when two people talk at the same time. We navigate this dance as humans with extreme elegance and effortlessness, but AI agents, are not born with that. So here's one way that you can handle it. It's not the way we always handle it, but it is the way that we sometimes handle it in the STT LLM or STT agent TTS case, which is basically, you might abort the response, but you want to make sure that you know what was said. So you add that to the transcript so that the next time you send context to an LLM, the transcript reflects what was actually said, and then you respond to the interruption. Cool. I know I went super fast through that section because I wanted to make sure we have time for the APX program, which is one of the big reasons we're all here. I'll give a quick overview of the program now. So basically, the program is a combination of agent engineering, which we've talked about a lot, agent product management, which I'll talk about a bit more during this section, and then also being fresh out of school, being super curious, super passionate about what you can build in the space, super ambitious and ready to contribute and ready to learn a lot of different things, and then tie them together holistically, which I talked about earlier as well. It starts with a 2-week boot camp, and then there are 2 rotations. Some folks will start as agent engineers, some folks will start as agent PMs, and then after 9 months, you flip. Very similar to some 2-year rotations, but we just felt like we're moving so fast. The company was completely different 9 months ago that it felt silly to have a full year before rotating. Double clicking on it, this is kind of boot camp is forever in a way. There's continuing education. There's a monthly speaker series. There are a ton of leadership resources as well. And then I talked about agent engineering quite a bit, but agent product management. So every deployment that we have, we actually have an agent engineer and an agent PM staffed on it. And the agent PM is, basically in charge of treating it like a full-fledged product. So it's similar to a product manager role, at a company like Google, where I spent 7 years, basically just figuring out how the agent needs to work, you putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and also the customer's customer, the end user, and really being the owner or the sort of mini CEO for the success of that agent. And you might work on a handful of agents as an agent PM as well at the same time. And then our APXs will graduate into an agent PM or agent engineering role full time. Really taking into account where you've had the most success and where you want to be with your career. Here's kind of the underlying belief. I mentioned it earlier, like generalism, understanding the technology and the product and the business and the customer's specific situation. We think this is super important, especially in the age of AI. There's a little bit less of a need to actually go super deep and do everything, at least not at first. You can kind of get a sense of different things and use intuition, and kind of being the orchestrator is more important than ever. And so taking that responsibility and saying, I'm going to do whatever it takes to create, ship, and distribute a great product is what we want to set our APXs up for. I think in addition to being agent engineers, agent PMs, these folks are people that are going to found companies and hopefully 10 or 20 years from now, start the next company similar to Sierra, the next version of Sierra. Doesn't have to be similar. Here's kind of the inspiration for the program. It's really 2 things. One is Google's Associate Product Manager program. This started, I think, in 2003. And Brett, who's one of our founders on the right there, was in the first class of APMs. Clay on the left was in the 3rd class of APMs. And then also, I think our first 4 agent PMs, including me, were also started as Google APM. So we have a ton of Google APM DNA in the company, and a particular reverence for those early days and kind of, 20 years ago, what it was like to join a company like Google and to have that much autonomy and responsibility, and just kind of the magic of that program and the class that it created. And so that's a big inspiration for us. And then similarly, our agent development team, which you can see here, a bunch of us, we've really taken ownership over customer success, over building out more features in the agent SDK, over strategizing and just making our customers super successful and kind of moving the ball forward in terms of what agents can do, and taking full ownership. And so kind of smashing those things together, early Google APM and agent development, is how we came up with APX. The last value, it's kind of just shoehorned in here, but it's really important to us. I think it dovetails really nicely with competitive intensity. When we're in the office, we're on, but a lot of us also have families at home. There's a way in which we view being together in a startup as, not the same thing as your family, but there's a family component to it. And so we're really committed to supporting and respecting each other and celebrating achievements and being there for each other. And so gets me to the end of presentation quiz, which is what are the 5 values. I'll pause for like 2 seconds so that if you remember them, you can give yourself a pat on the back. But just so we can go over them, it's trust first and foremost. really being obsessed with the customers we work with, putting ourselves in their shoes, trying to do right by them over the long term, craftsmanship, making things great, not stopping at good, then making them excellent and continuing to iterate, make things better and better. And then competitive intensity, when we're working, we're on, we know this is going to be a competitive space, but also we really value family. We're here for each other. We know that we have lives outside of work. And so we kind of put all these things together. And I think that undergirds a lot of what we live by and work by at the company. So I'll flash the next slide, and then we can spend the next 5 minutes or so on questions. I know there's one kind of in the queue. And then meanwhile, Sierra.ai/APX is the best way to apply. I think there might be another way to get in touch too, but this works great. We read every application that comes in. So thank you so much. Diving into the questions, there's one in the bank here. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a fast-moving field. What is our bet on R&D at Sierra as you continue to fulfill the needs of your clients? What is the culture for balancing craftsmanship and pivoting? These are really good questions. So there are kind of two bets on R&D, an internal bet and an external bet. I think the question is about the internal bet. So I'll answer that first and then maybe make a point about external as well. Internally, we have a research team. It's a large percentage of our company for our size. Our company is about 100 people right now, and I think 5 or 6 are working on research. That will continue to grow. We think what we're doing is difficult, and we benefit a ton from, research and also applied research in terms of improving the underlying Agent SDK and underlying AI platform. I think even when it comes to working with customers, we've had researchers partner directly on deployments to help kind of unblock and improve agents. And then we've also had breakthroughs in terms of fine-tuning, et cetera, in order to make the core agent platform better, and then also individual agents for some of our larger customers. So it's a huge investment here. We really view this as a highly intellectual field. We think AI agents is only going to continue to grow as a field, and so we're deeply invested. In terms of the external bet, I think there's also just a bet on systems continuing to improve, performance continuing to improve, reasoning continue to improve, cost continuing to come down. And so we definitely are kind of skating to where the puck is going, and using some tools that might not be cost effective now, but we have pretty great confidence that they will be a year from now. And that's similar, I think, to kind of the earlier phases of Silicon Valley, maybe even in like the or like the posture of the PC industry in the 80s, where if you're building for the current technology, you're going to be behind by the time you ship. And so that's just really fun to be a part of, and fun to kind of have a lens into with all of our amazing researchers here, kind of like giving us a sense of what they see coming and helping us make informed decisions there. I will say we don't have any significant pre-training investment. So, we're not pre-training models from scratch. We kind of have an approach that it includes fine-tuning, includes frontier models, includes cost-effective models for easy tasks, but not any pre-training from scratch. And so from a business perspective, we probably look a little bit more like a SaaS business economically than some of the large pre-training companies. And then the other question here was, what is the culture for balancing craftsmanship and pivoting? One thing I really like about this is we have the platform, and then we have each agent, and every agent is kind of its own product. So in a way, the product manager for each agent is kind of in charge of this balance. And so that allows us to have people that are as close as possible to the information, actually making decisions about whether a particular agent, needs to pivot in a different direction or whether it works. And so this kind of layered stack makes it a bit easier. I think also so far, we chose a big idea. We knew it was going to be big. And so to the extent that pivot is really a full turning of the company, it's not something that we've done. We've been pretty consistent since we started the design partner program and had success there. Great. I think we're at exactly 10 a.m. Pacific. Really appreciate everyone who tuned in or who will watch this after the fact. And definitely feel free to get in touch. We hope you all apply at sierra.ai/APX. And feel free to share thoughts or get in touch on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or just however you prefer. We love having conversations. We think college kids are some of the smartest folks in the space. And so it's really awesome to have you here and awesome to get to interact with you. Hope to meet you soon.